This is the Garden of English. I'm Tim Freitas, and today I brought a good friend on so we could go over 4 tips that could help you with responding to the argument prompt. So, you're going to want to hear what we have to say. All right, folks, I am here today with my friend Regan Killackey, right? We are half a continent away from one another, but that doesn't mean that we can't have a conversation to actually help you out. Before we actually let Regan talk about himself and introduce himself, I would like to give a huge shout out to the Garden of English Patreon supporters. You'll see their names, like if I move this way, I think they're over here. Yeah, they're over here. So check out those names. They're people that support. If you're interested in supporting the Garden of English through Patreon, please note that in the video up in the corner over there, you can actually see some of the benefits that do indeed come with that. The Garden of English appreciates Patreon supporters, and we look forward to bringing you more content. All right, now let's get right into this here. We are going to talk about 4 tips for writing argument. And before we do, though, why don't you tell us a little bit about you, Regan, and what you do in the College Board world?
Hi, I'm Regan Killackey. I teach in Edmond, Oklahoma. Been teaching AP Lang since like 2013. A little bit AP Lit since like 09. For College Board, I've been an AP reader for I think around 7-8 years. I'm not really sure. And I've been a table leader for around 4. And last year was the first year we were in the COVID nightmare of being a sample selection committee member. And that was really fun with stressful but fun either way. So
Gotcha. Now, have you ever read the argument prompt for when you were at the reading?
Absolutely, and it's my favorite prompt to read. You're never bored. You're always entertained, and you just never know what interesting and intellectual things that all of you will come up with when given the chance.
Well, so it's interesting because I've been reading for a bunch of years too, and I've never been assigned to the argument prompt. I've done synthesis a bunch. I've done rhetorical analysis a bunch. I once did a split year of synthesis and rhetorical analysis, but argument has never come in. So I'm like, maybe this year, maybe this will be my argument year.
Maybe if someone's watching the video, they can help us out.
Right, someone who knows people, right? But anyway, So we're gonna just get into this here because we want to get this information to students and teachers, from 2 AP readers that are also involved in sample selection and whatnot. Let's actually talk about the 4 things that we think are kind of the biggest kind of issues or the biggest things that kids should consider when they get into their argument, when they get into writing their argument. So why don't you actually start us off here?
Well, one thing we just talked about is, doing some reflection of this entire year and reflecting on your overall relationship with every single question, but specifically with the argument question, because we want you to know where your limits are. So how quickly you can get started, and how much time you have to spend in writing a robust intro or a robust thesis sentence alone to start out your essay. So really having a real close look at what you've done all year and where you need to kind of focus your attention heading into the exam on May 12th.
So you're actually, considering here the idea that some kids should be writing full intro paragraphs in your classroom, and some might actually just be like, hey, let's get a thesis on there and let's get you going. Is that the kind of idea?
And I think that you have had students in class, and I've had students in class where student A clearly has the speed of flash, and they can immediately get through a full-on conversation about whatever the prompt is asking, leading to an actual complex thesis sentence. And while others are really struggling to kind of pull it together, and it's going to take them a longer amount of time, like literal minutes, to kind of figure out exactly how to approach beginning that argument question. So for those students, I coach them to immediately start with a thesis sentence and make sure it has all the qualifications of where they're headed in their essay.
Gotcha. And so that's a great first point here. We've got that kind of Polonius recommendation to Laertes, right? To thine own self be true, right? But in order to do that, you have to know thyself, right? So going in, it sounds to me like piece of advice number 1 is know your limits as a writer. And if you know that you're gonna, it's gonna take you a little while to even just produce a thesis, go in to just write a thesis. If you know that you were born going to Harvard, well, at that point, just go in and actually write your full intro. Super cool. Just real quick, one little tip that I actually give my students, though, is that I actually require all my kids, or I tell my kids they can get away with just writing their thesis, but I do often ask them to skip 3 to 4 lines at the beginning so that they can go back. If they've got 5 minutes left, they can actually tag on the intro paragraph there.
That is really good advice. I've never even thought about doing that, and I might even throw that little bit of knowledge to my kids running it. That's definitely wise advice to come back and write the hook and get in. Yeah.
Right. Well, especially if they have only 3 minutes left, right? They're not going to be adding to a body paragraph at that point. So let's try to see if we can, get a little intro in there. All right, I'm going to take number 2 here, right? So piece of advice number 2 is something that I've been preaching like this whole past year. In fact, the other day when I did my AP Live, I did the same thing, and that is really focusing on the prompt in order to break it down and use it, to get all of what you want to be thinking out. Like, use the prompt. The prompt can do most of the work for you. So basically, when you look at the prompt, I tell my students, right, you want to find out what the exigence is actually given, what exigence is given to you. I think about a few years ago, they did this creativity crisis prompt where they even said, write to your school board about this. So they give you this whole, like, hey, kids are struggling with being creative, and they're like, write to your school board. And most kids did not write a letter to their school board. And it's like, you had the audience given to you, your school board. You could talk to the school board members of, I'm at Whitensville Christian, to the school board members of Whitensville Christian. And a lot of kids just didn't do it. Doesn't mean they didn't write good papers, but like, it's there. So use that prompt and say, what's the exigence, right? The next thing that you could use that prompt for is you can go in there and you can find different positions about the topic that the prompt is. And for those students that do have a little bit of a hard time actually articulating their own position, maybe they can actually pull in and adopt some of the positions that are in the prompt and try to say, I can springboard off of that. The last thing about planning with the prompt itself, though, is going to that command where it says argue your position on, and then turning that into a question. When it says argue your position on the relationship between certainty and doubt, like they had a few years ago, well, what is the relationship between certainty and doubt? If you answer that in your thesis, you know that you are indeed actually answering the prompt. How can you beat that here, right? Anything that you make your kids do with the prompt?
Well, I think that's really great to see, to expose yourself to all the different types of open-ended questions. And I know that all of you teachers have been, sharing all the different varieties of question 3s, but some will have that narrow exigence, that narrow rhetorical situation where you are forced into discussing creativity and education.
Right. And
you're forced to talk about that, and you really don't have the door to open the latest controversy that you might be paying attention to on your breaking news app. Right. I think that is really, really useful when it comes to taking a look at it. And then, like you said, creating an actual question that really does take a look at multiple perspectives of what's happening in the prompt.
Right. And, the other thing, too, about creating that question is that when you write a thesis, if it doesn't clearly answer that question, like if it's like, well, I think it kind of maybe answers that. No, it doesn't at that point, and you are not APing. So turning it into that question is super important. And if anybody wants actually more information about how to do that, I do have a video up in the corner there about how to break down the argument prompt. Okay, next one here. This one goes to you. So kids get the prompt, they read it, they already know if they're going to come in writing a thesis and whatnot, but what's the next step for you? What's the next tip that you can give?
The hardest thing that is about the actual argument prompt, and the most challenging thing, is really coming up with the wisest context that's going to fit the prompt. So, as you might have seen in past prompts, you have the suggestion that you could use your observation, your experience, and or your reading. And so, coming up with a context that actually does work with the prompt in relationship to the prompt is not easy to do when you're stressed and you're really stressed on time. So
AP, anxiety, and pressure, right? I think that's it. Yeah.
Exactly. And so spending time thinking about all the things that you've been exposed to throughout the entire year, texts that your teachers have actually brought in, or things that you've actually read on your own. And it depends on the overall prompt on how you're going to go ahead and work with that context. For instance, if you had the prompt that I need you to take a position on something that's overrated and why it has an elite status, that opens the door of personal analysis. and you get to use personal experience and write a fantastic essay without going on a Dear Diary sort of rant.
Right.
Right. But you actually get to really use your own preferences. I mean, I was on that. I was not on that prompt, and I was jealous I was not on that prompt because I was waiting for some student to write the In-N-Out burger essay.
Yeah.
Like cult status when it comes to like consumer branding. And I thought it was going to be great because if they had their own preferences over fast food.
Right.
There's something like disobedience causing social progress.
Right.
That's the over, really taking a look at the prompt and looking at what is available to you. For social progress, disobedience causing social progress, trying to find personal experience is going to be really difficult unless you were part of the movie Moxie or something like that.
Right. When it comes to my students, right, I always just tell them, if you're gonna create this context of what you're gonna write into, and then that's gonna help essentially bring out your examples that you're going to use, I just tell them to remember 3 S's, right? Subject, society, and self, right? So can I pull from my subjects that I know that I learned in school? Can I pull from examples from society, that's pop culture, sports, technology, or whatever? And can I pull from myself, right? Personal experience, secondary anecdotes, that's like stories from friends, and also finally hypotheticals. The problem is that hypotheticals suck. So like anybody watching this, like please don't use hypotheticals. They're typically garbage, Yeah,
and I have a sort of similar thing where I tell them to take a look at the 3 E's: environment, economics, and education.
Yeah.
And then like the one big R, and that's regulation. The subtext of that is self-regulation. That's personal experience. And then you have private and versus public regulation. So you have companies versus overall government regulations. And then finally, like human safety and human health, which kind of go hand in hand. And a lot of the synthesis questions that we've seen cover a lot of those, but a lot of those a lot of the argument prompts will open up all of those doors for them to like discuss the details that are happening locally or nationally or globally, depending on where they are in the exam.
Right, but for this third tip here, you had mentioned this idea of this context and allowing the context of the prompt to help generate the evidence, but the real idea here that I think we want to harp on is the idea of planning with that, right? So how are we going to get all of our thoughts there? We have to actually plan. We've been told to plan for so long in our lives, and for some reason we just like don't do it. And it's like, no, on test day, take your 4 minutes and just plan, right?
I don't know how strict you are as a teacher, but when it comes to the open-ended argument, I've had maybe 2 students that could, without like listing and brainstorming, planning, and just get right to the essay. 2 students out of 18 years that could actually do that. So it is like a rule. You have got to provide at least 3 words at minimum,
right?
Where they're going to follow a pathway and give themselves a blueprint to come back to.
Yeah.
And that is just incredibly crucial, especially when it comes to trying to have one context, like social or disobedience causing social progress, and having some sort of way to get from a Rosa Parks to American Revolution scenario. And so they're going to have to do a lot of grounds for comparison using the prompt to establish that line of reasoning. So, and that doesn't happen without really intentional and meaningful planning.
Right. And, just to practice with that, what I make my students do is I make my kids actually write thesis statements and topic sentences that go through their essay. And I'm like, so you have 4 sentences that you've written now, and that's going to be your whole paper. So anybody who's watching this who's like, I need to practice for my AP exam, go look up the old prompts. You just go into your internet search and you just type in, hey, past AP prompts, past AP link prompts. They'll show up. Pick an argument prompt and then just say, okay, how would I write this thesis? What my topic sentences look like? And that's great planning too.
Yeah, and we're going to do the same thing in class when it comes to planning drills. So it's like it's 7 to 14 minutes. I mean, that's the window we have here to do this, because even if you spend 14 minutes or 15 minutes planning and then using the rest of your time, because it's the end of the actual marathon of the exam, it's going to go so much better for you than trying to force some sort of conversation. That's when you end up with your stuff and things and vague.
Right, and it just kind of like, regurgitates out, and it's like, that doesn't make any sense, of course. And that's no fun for us to read, that's for sure. All right, last tip here, right, and that's going to be this, right? When it comes to an argument, make sure that you produce a complex thesis. Well, should I say, for me, it's a thesis that is a complex sentence. So what that means is that your thesis has at least one subordinate clause or one dependent clause. Now, some of y'all are like, what is this grammar nonsense that he's talking here, right? Basically, what that means is I tell my students, like, you need to have a subordinated conjunction in there. If you need a list of subordinated conjunctions, just type it right into an internet search. Subordinated conjunctions, they're right there. But you got to have at least one in there. Or I also tell my kids they can use coordinating conjunctive adverbs. So they either have to do one or the other to establish this complexity here. What does that look like for you?
I kind of cheat, and I tell them, and some people will disagree with this approach, but if they get used to using just the word although, within the prompt, if they can see multiple positions on whatever it is, if they begin with although, and I know many of you do the same thing, it automatically puts them into a subordinating, clause, introductory clause that's going to use a comma, and then is going to establish their main claim, and then at the end of their main claim, forecasting their subclaims, items in a series, three-pronged, whatever you want to choose, but at least having them begin with that, it forces them into the one structure of complexity like you were talking about a second ago, and then it forces them to see the multiple perspectives that are happening within the prompt for the majority of the time.
Right, and you know what, that's actually kind of nice, because when you look at the sophistication point, one of the ways that you can earn that is by looking at the tensions and complexities within the argument, and if the thesis is already complex, that's going to help actually get kids through that. Now, the thesis isn't going to get them the sophistication point, but if they actually address the thesis as it's listed for their line of reasoning, then sure enough, that can totally lead to that. So,
and it really, it does, offer, the option of a concession, or it offers really a blueprint for how you're going to write your essay. So either you begin with it or you end with it. But one thing is certain, and I'll say this time and time again, a concession for whenever we're reading the argument prompt, and I don't know who would disagree with this, but I always believe a concession, if it fits, is way more bang for the buck than attempting a conclusion.
Gotcha. Yeah. So, instead of putting a full conclusion on there, maybe even mixing a concession into the conclusion, right?
Yep.
You go through your whole paper, you prove it, and then you're like, it must be admitted that the limitation is here, and yet here's why the bigger extension is still more applicable. You could totally throw that down in probably 5 sentences as well, and then you've got the concession that's kind of built in there. So that's super cool too. So those are our 4 tips here, folks. Okay, once again, we've got, know yourself as you go into your paper. We have used the prompt to your advantage. We've got, hey, look at the context of the prompt and what it gives you to help generate your evidence, and then we have generate a complex thesis. I'll tell you what, Regan, I'm super amped that you were willing to come on here with me.
Thank you so much.
We've been Facebook friends for a little bit, but we haven't really known each other, much past that. So it's great to actually be able to have a conversation with you and pull on your expertise, So just so everybody knows, right, the easiest way that you can help the Garden of English is by clicking like and subscribe. If this video is helpful for you, it's completely free for you to do. That's totally awesome. We do have a bunch of affiliate links right down in the description down below. So I ask that you consider clicking on some of those. We have merch. I always try to link it up in the corner up there, but it doesn't link, and I don't know why, even though it always says it's an approved site. But you can just go to thegardenofenglish.com and pick that up. We're active on Facebook. We're active on Instagram, and you should send us a like there. As the test does come up, if you want to leave any questions for Regan or me down in the comments below, by all means, leave them there. And you'll want to leave them for Regan, by the way, because I'm going to just be like, hey, Regan, can you just answer that? Can you just go on YouTube and answer that? And I'm just going to push that on him. Right?
I need all the work.
That's right. That's right.
I'm completely free.
Right. So anyway, I really appreciate you. I appreciate you coming on, and I hope you have a great night.
Thank you, Tim.
All right.